Hey guys, welcome back to Trackyards. I'm Captain Foley.
I'm Chronicles and guest.
I am a pile of poop.
He is. That's his emoji. Welcome, Mr. Anti-Trekker, to the show.
Good to be here. We had a lot of fun talking about the Borg, and so now Commander Cockings wants his revenge. So, what?
No, sequel, but in a ship context, because we are Trekyards, we love ships, and so we threw some topics at you, hoping one would bite, and you did bite on one. And now we can continue the debate series by talking about Star Trek, obviously, TOS, but Stuart, let us in on what we're talking about, and the basic potential argument, or discussion, or debate, or we're right, who knows?
Today we're going to be talking about the Romulan Warbird from TOS, or the Romulan Bird of Prey from TOS. There's going to be some debate about that, but also whether it fits in the design aesthetic for the Romulans now having been screwed up by Enterprise and that Bird of Prey. We're going to talk about some design evolution and have a little bit of a discussion here, because I think we all have differing views on this.
Yeah, I mean, this is just one representation of the jump, but obviously, the next time we see this, at least this race, is the Romulan Doderidex in a few hundred years, and so the real question is, does this ship, it being white and all the shapes, still fit in the timeline? And obviously, you'll see, currently on the screen, the evolutionary set. Does it still fit in this timeline of things? So I'll ask Stuart what he thinks, and then we'll jump to Anti-Trekker and jump to me. Stuart, what do you think? Does this ship still fit in the timeline?
It does, because it was the original Romulan ship, so it's obviously the one that existed first. And Enterprise came along and messed up canon royally in quite a few areas, that being one of them right there. Fantastic design. John Eves did a great design on it. That should have been like TMP era Bird of Prey Romulan ship, in my opinion. But putting it that far back in the timeline and then trying to explain the TOS one is easily done. It incorporates some brand new Federation tech that they've stolen plans for to perhaps enhance their the smoothness of their hull, to help the cloaking device that they just created, even though it was apparently around in Enterprise, which is also BS. So it is the original Bird of Prey. It is the original Romulan ship. So it, of course, is canon, and it does exist.
If you go with the assumption that the timeline is Enterprise and TOS and then the next generation, then I would say absolutely not. Because it is clear that the ship from Enterprise and the ship from the next generation seem to be related to each other. Mm-hmm. However, this would be the odd man out because it doesn't look like either one. And it's like the Romulans went, we like this green curvy look. Nah, let's go with a beige type of, no, let's go back to green. That's kind of what we see. But here's the thing, is that I think that what we really have here is that Enterprise is not in the same timeline as the original series, period. And that fixes a lot of problems. I don't know if you've seen it, but I've done videos about this before, where I think that the events of First Contact, when they went back to the 22nd century, create an alternate timeline. Enterprise is in that alternate timeline where the Federation is trying to improve their technology because of the encounter with the Borg. And so we end up with a different set of circumstances for all the races in the Alpha Quadrant.
Although it still leads to TNG, because we still see TNG in that timeline.
I think it does. Like, if you could, the original TOS Bird of Prey, that is it's an original idea, but it really just looks like the saucer section from a Constitution class with the warp pylons glued directly to it instead of having a secondary hull. I mean, I know that's an oversimplification, but really what it looks like the saucer section from a Miranda class with a couple of the original series warp engines thrown on, and maybe the Klingon struts.
I think you're forgetting that this was an experimental new design, testing out the new plasma-based torpedo. So it could be a standalone ship all on its own, created specifically for that purpose and to infiltrate Federation space. So why give away too much? Let's make it look like one of their ships, and then they're way off course on what's going on with the Romulan ship designs.
And I would be all on board with that if it wasn't for the fact that we see the Romulans swarming around with packs of them later on. So in the deadly years, we see that they have 10 of them attack the Enterprise. And by the way, despite their uber powerful plasma weapons, they got a massive downgrade to where 10 Romulan birds of prey can open fire on the Enterprise, and they're just kind of shaking around going, we can't take too much more of this. And it's like when the first time they encountered, a single hit would have critically damaged or disabled the Enterprise if the Enterprise was in range of that hit.
I'm going to end up talking about Starfleet battles now.
That's okay.
According to Starfleet battles, there are different versions of this ship. The King Eagle, the War Eagle, all with different variations on weapons, different plasma torpedo strengths, because it became more than an experimental weapon. They actually kind of enhanced the tech, and power levels are pretty different from an S-type to an R-type plasma torpedo. Now,
but it doesn't make any sense.
Why not?
Because if you have a plasma torpedo that can completely annihilate your enemy, your only weakness is that it's relatively slow moving, and so you can't escape it, but you also have a cloaking device, so you can sneak attack. If you have a fleet of these ships and you drop out a cloak and immediately open fire and then recloak, you get one of them as a hit, you've taken down that starship. You hit a starbase with 2 hits, and the starbase is it was an outpost, but it was buried on an asteroid, a mile deep, solid iron with shields. 2 hits, and it's gone.
That's a little overpowered.
Well, that's the idea of that weapon, though.
Well, yeah, in the game, of course, you can outrun it because the maximum speed in that game for your ships is 31. The torpedo travels at 32. So you can outrun it, but it will eventually catch you. But you have to energy allocation, get up to speed, and all of that. So the farther it travels, the less impact it has, obviously.
Well, they also did say in Balance of Terror that if their phasers were operational, they could have detonated it by shooting it.
Yes, you can shoot it as well with your weapons, your phasers. Only phasers, though, not torpedoes, to cause damage to it and decrease its effectiveness in the game. So, Samuel, you haven't said much. I'm interested to hear your views on this. You're just
it's fun. You tend to watch the shows the way you remember them. So I haven't seen all the remasters because I haven't gone back and watched them. So I didn't even know there were a swarm of them in Deadly Years. I've been finding clips. That's really cool. I never seen those ones. That's awesome.
To answer what you were just saying, though, Commander, is that in the unremastered version of it, they still mention that there are 10 birds of prey. You just don't see them all on screen because they didn't have the visual effects capability.
So I remember it being, in the episode where they, were captured, the Enterprise incident, there was an extra one added in VFX. That's the only one I knew that appeared again. And it was like, okay, so this thing is not clearly... that can't be the same exact class of ship, otherwise it would seem very redundant to have a either non-warp capable or warp capable, depending on the perspective of the show, ship to back up inferior ships when this one weapon is more powerful. So they must have, changed the design, altered the design, or done the space frame. But I mean, it's one of those things where there's the canon, there's the visual canon, there's the theoretical canon, there's the Trekyards. We've got to make it make sense. I mean, the fact that John Eves and the Enterprise team were so intensive in actually having a sense of visual language, that meant that obviously these two are linked. You can't deny they are the same race, just a different time. And there's 100 years-ish between them. And then 100 years in between this and the Deredex. The problem is that's a radically different class of ship. This is not the same style of ship, and so it's silly to say they all follow the same thing. It probably would have been...
What's the designation for the Enterprise era?
That's
ship?
A Warbird.
Really? Is it called a Warbird?
Pretty sure.
Yeah.
Pretty sure. So I mean, this is as far as when it's like a medium warship. This is experimental. Then it becomes a generic warship as well. Deredex is the Uber Pride. It's the iPhone X when you're on iPhone 2. It's like where did that come from?
Well, the Deredex, here's the thing. I think that you should, if you were going to try and fix the timeline, so to speak, you go from the TOS one to that Enterprise era Warbird instead of the Deredex, because the Deredex does not look like it's made by the same people.
But like I say, it's a functionally different ship.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that these two are so similar means this one can exist. The color is the only one. The fact the shapes are so radically different in terms of the pieces is weird. But like Stuart said, it's trying to test different technologies. And I like what he said about in one of our episodes. Yeah, the color was deliberately painted this way so that the armor could absorb this, and this. And it's better for cloaking this, and this. So it's a test bed. It works fine as a test bed, although it's a bit odd to fly a clearly familiar looking ship into someone's space and paint it white as if that'll affect how you think of the ship. Really, it's like, yeah, you can work out it's Romulan, and you can work out the power signals Romulan, you can work out the life signs Romulan. I mean, there's, all these guesses. I'm sure they could work that out. It's not going to really convince anybody particularly.
I wasn't saying that they wouldn't think it wasn't Romulan. I'm just saying, in order to, because the Federation hadn't seen the Romulans really in TOS. So that first shot, they think that's what the ship design is. They get all the scans of it, but really their ships look like they did in Enterprise, totally different. And this one was just a basic shell. It was just a test bed, a platform for that plasma torpedo.
Although this ship was never meant to be seen. I mean, its job was to destroy these 12 outposts.
True.
So its mission failure was because we saw it.
Yeah, but they knew there was a possibility that they were testing Federation strength and defenses, so they knew there was a possibility that they would run into a ship. So why give away too much of what your culture is doing ship-wise when you don't have to?
Then why? Yeah, I mean, they also then communicated with them, so they broke that protocol within 2 minutes, or I guess they hacked in. But you know what I mean? That became very irrelevant very quickly. And there's more. You can make it not look like a bird, and so certainly wouldn't war paint it if you want it not to look Romulan. So that kind of works. It's just like saying in the remasters, if they'd made this green, would that have helped? Yes, quite a lot. As what made this a plate detail rather than a paint. I think that would have probably, because this is much more plated, that those two things would have been fine. The fact that these not being warp engines, I think, is interesting, because you could say they were like plasma filters. They take in stellar matter, it brings them in here, it allows them to refine, then it goes into the gun. Then you're saying, well, they don't have to look like the warp engines because they're not. But then it's not a warp engine ship, and that's a weird thing to have for any spacefaring. And then obviously we see it later on, and it's identical, and it's like, oh.
Yeah, it's debatable whether they're warp engines or not, because the way Scotty makes it sound is that they didn't have warp, but I'm sure they did. We talked about this in our episode.
Yeah.
Or how it could have been dropped off by a bigger ship in Federation space.
I think the problem there with Scotty is, and this is just a limitation of the time, is that they hadn't really worked out warp drive, impulse drive numbers, right? They just knew that the warp engines were the main engines, and the impulse drive was like the slow subspace engines, right? And so when Scotty said, "Oh, simple impulse," meaning we can outrun them, yes, well, what they were thinking of, and I think what the writers was going on in their head was their power source was like simple fusion reactors as opposed to matter antimatter reactors. That the actual power generation on a Romulan ship was nowhere near what a Constitution class ship could generate as far as power. However, that plasma torpedo and the cloaking device offset that. So and that's where that ship was simply a launch bed for the plasma torpedo and the cloaking device. There was no other purpose for it. That's why it had such a tiny crew. They notice how sparse their bridge is. They don't even have a view screen. Everything about it was like, this is a utilitarian vessel. Where the Deredex looks like, it's bigger than a Galaxy class, and it looks like a freaking city in space.
See, the one designed for Enterprise, I think, fits in the movie era, kind of an evolution from the TOS up to the Deredex. Plus, we hadn't seen the Romulans for like 80 years. They were off on other borders, fighting other races, protecting their borders. So it could be that they acquired different tech. That's why the Deredex is so different, so large, because whoever they were fighting, we needed that kind of, or they needed that kind of ship to handle that. So I don't have a problem with the Deredex as being a totally different class of ship. It's like comparing a Type F shuttle to like a Constitution class and saying, oh, they're obviously not related because they look nothing alike. That's just silly.
I mean, I would easily assume they're a Deredex-ish style in the TOS era. They're green, they've got beaks, they're just a much more, much less.
Like the one we saw in Star Trek Online. I forget what the
exactly.
name of
I don't. This is not a representation of a Romulan of a classic warship. it can't be. As you said, it was custom built to be the weapons carrier, and then it was a sort of a failure for some reason. I guess because they weren't all capable, and then they became a fleet of them, as you said in Deadly Years, and that's the fact that they are able to not take out the Enterprise implies that it was. They had 20 space frames. They were hoping for this big conquest. Didn't quite work because the power offset of weapon to cloak to sublight wasn't worth it. So they put warp drive on. They upped the the shields. They upped all the basic stuff and gave them basic plasma what they could put in. And then suddenly these 30 space frames are useful, if not the next big thing, because why waste perfectly good ships that work? And you could say that, like Stuart said, I mean, if you don't want to reveal what tech you've got, reusing this somewhat failed experiment, and then obviously using the D7s, buying this other ship, you're not giving anything away to the Federation as what you really have. These other classes that need to stay cloaked, need to be here and there, need to be spying. That is this week's Trekyards done and dusted. Next week we've got another great part.
Yes, the continuation next week. Tune in.
So 7 days and just click on that link. So we'll see you then.
See you then, guys.